So I'm here in Salt Lake City, which is not a huge city, but yet it has 47 miles of light rail, 88 miles of commuter rail, and 2 rapid bus lines. A lot more than you'd expect for a city of this size. Its one commuter rail line would even be the 4th busiest in the Chicago metropolitan area, which is an urban area about 3 times larger than Salt Lake City. So the question is, what's happening here that's not happening in other cities? And how does this building play a role in it? That building, the Rio Grande Depot, hasn't seen trains in 20 years. That's not that surprising. Very few US cities still use their original Grand Central stations for trains. But in Salt Lake's case, this train station holds the key to possibly the single biggest improvement the city could make to itself in one fell swoop. It could make passenger rail more attractive and more efficient not just for Salt Lake, but for the entire Mountain West, opening up the door for several new state-supported routes. Join me on a visit to Salt Lake City, where we meet with the guy who's at the core of this grassroots push to not only revive the Rio Grande Depot, but also rework the entire rail right-of-way to make it work better for the city of Salt Lake. First off, I just want to give a huge shout out to Christian Lenhart and all the advocates behind the Rio Grande Plan. Without their insight, there's no way I could have made this video, and please go check out their website, it'll be linked down below. And if you're interested in diving into any one particular aspect of the Rio Grande Plan, check out Christian's YouTube channel, I'll also have a link to that down below. Now let's get back to the video. Salt Lake City is probably bigger than you thought, or at least that's what I learned on this trip. If you just look at the Census Bureau Metropolitan Statistical Area population for the city, that's only 1.25 million, not much bigger than Birmingham, Alabama. But Salt Lake sneakily has 2 other metro areas right next to it on its north and south. The Ogden-Clearfield MSA with 637,000 people, and the Provo-Orem MSA with 671,000 people. At one point there may have been more space between these metro areas, but at this point the area known as the Wasatch Front is a single 100-mile-long metro area with a combined population of around 2.5 million people. The picture looks a lot different if you define it that way. At that point, the metro area is closer in size to Austin and San Antonio. And indeed, the Utah Transit Authority's service area includes the 5 counties besides the core Salt Lake County, which together have a similar 2.6 million people, or 80% of the entire population of Utah. Utah as a whole was the fastest growing state in the country from 2010 to 2020, and it's projected to add another 2 million residents in the next 40 years. But let's set the scene even more. With all this recent growth, Salt Lake City is a pretty new city. The UTA didn't exist in 1940, but if it had, its modern-day service area would have a population of just 370,000 people, about 1/7 of what it is today. I always like to look at what a city's population was right before World War II, because that gives you an idea of how much of the city was built before every household owned a car. Cities with a good stock of old-style urban fabric, like Pittsburgh or San Francisco, both already had around 2 million people in their metro areas by 1940. A lot of Salt Lake and its little brother and little sister metro areas feel very sunbelt-like, which is to say it's obvious they were built with the prevailing planning and engineering mindset that everyone would be getting around by car. Or maybe it's more accurate to say that Brigham Young wanted streets to be wide enough to be able to do a U-turn with a team of oxen without resorting to profanity. But there is still a surprising number of walkable, tight-knit, old-style neighborhoods and city centers in the area, but they exist alongside a lot of comically wide roads and car-dominated subdivisions. Salt Lake has actually been able to use some of those wide roads, which on average are about 120 feet wide in and around downtown, to serve non-drivers as well as car drivers. That's at least one reason why they were able to build their light rail system, the tracks, without disrupting all that many lanes of traffic, thus making it more politically viable. And I think this approach says a lot about Salt Lake urbanism and transit. They've built transit infrastructure into a more car-dominated landscape, and in general, it works. Remember how I said the combined Wasatch Front is about the size of San Antonio or Austin? Well, the UTA gets at least 1/3 more riders than both of those metro area transit systems, both of which, like the UTA, are the primary transit operator in town. And sorry, Texas, I guess I'm going to continue dunking on you, but Salt Lake even has double the amount of light rail that Houston has, and Greater Houston has almost 3 times as many people as the whole Wasatch Front, and Houston doesn't have a single mile of mainline commuter rail. But here's where we do need to add some nuance. While it does have double the amount of track length, UTA's light rail only got about 1/4 more daily riders than Houston's light rail system. UTA does pretty good ridership numbers for a city like Salt Lake, but I don't want you going home thinking it's the best. Just to give you an idea, Portland, Oregon's transit agency, TriMet, has a service area with about 77% the population of UTA's, but TriMet gets about 1.6 times the ridership of UTA. But even so, I think we've established here that transit in the Wasatch Front does numbers, probably more than you'd expect it to, punching above its weight class but not winning the whole weight class. It's enough that it's worth looking into exactly why transit works here, so let's start doing that. Let's look at their existing transit.
All right, well, I'm Christian Lenhart. I'm a civil engineer. I live here in Salt Lake City. I've worked on several major freeway projects here and also some transit lines.
Right after meeting with Christian, my girlfriend and I took the front runner down to Provo from Salt Lake Central, just a block or two from the old Rio Grande depot where I met Christian. We'll hear more from Christian about Salt Lake's transit in a second, but first, here's a map of every bit of transit we rode while in town for 3 days. This alone, I think, shows you just how possible it would be to live a full, car-free or car-light life in Salt Lake. UTA operates 3 light rail lines, the red, green, and blue, which together form the TRAX network, coming in at just shy of 45 miles of total track length, electrified at 750 volts DC overhead lines. All the lines run every 15 minutes from early morning, generally about 4:30 a.m., to a little after 11:30 p.m. on weekdays. Service is still pretty good on Saturday, but on Sunday it's a whole lot more limited system-wide, with trains only every 30 minutes on all TRAX lines. The green line is probably where you'll start if you fly in, like I did, partially because there's only 1 train per day in each direction to Salt Lake City, and they get in at terrible times to a pretty non-welcoming station, but we'll get to that. The green line is the shortest and least used TRAX line, just barely being edged out by the blue line in terms of ridership. It runs for 15 miles with 18 stations, starting right outside the main terminal entrance at Salt Lake City International Airport, and heading south towards downtown with a pretty slick in-system transfer to the Frontrunner Regional Rail line, which we'll talk more about in a second. It runs through downtown and out to the suburb of West Valley, passing by the Maverick Arena and ending at what looks to be a pretty thriving mall. I'll briefly touch on the S-Line streetcar, which is not technically part of the TRAX system, and funnily enough never actually runs on any street. It branches off from Central Point and heads about 2 miles east towards Sugar House Park. Now let's talk about the Blue Line, which is the second most used TRAX line and the second longest at 19 miles with 25 stations. Starting in the south, the Blue Line uses a repurposed Union Pacific Rail right-of-way for about 16 miles north, making another nice in-system transfer to the frontrunner at Murray Central before it starts street running just south of downtown. A decent amount of the TRAX network uses old freight right-of-ways like this. The Blue Line's northern terminus is Salt Lake Central Station, where it meets up with the frontrunner again. Salt Lake Central is also where Amtrak's California Zephyr stops at, and don't worry, this station gets put on blast later in this video. The final TRAX line, the Red Line, is the system's longest at 23.5 miles, and with almost 17,000 weekday boardings, it's Utah's busiest transit line. It starts at the University of Utah campus and makes a quick trip down the hillside into downtown. It turns south and runs with the green and blue lines for a while before heading southwest along an old Rio Grande Railroad right-of-way for about 9 miles out to the master-planned, newly built transit-oriented community of Daybreak. Where all the lines come together in downtown and point south, you have trains every 5 minutes in each direction, and there's even a fare free zone around this area, so you can just use the really frequent trunk line for short hops across downtown. In general, I'm a fan of the TRAX network, and I love how you have several really smooth transfer points with the regional rail. I do think they could stand to run better than 15-minute headways, and I'm also not really a fan of the older Siemens SD100s and SD160s used exclusively on the Blue Line. High floor boarding from low platforms just makes for a pretty awkward boarding experience, especially with luggage. Apparently there's a plan to purchase more low floor vehicles to phase out the older high floor ones by 2030. I also think speed is a bit of an issue, especially in the downtown section. Trains really come to a crawl through here, which slows the whole system down. I'm sure someone at some point has proposed a downtown tunnel for the trunk lines, but apparently the soils aren't the best here for tunneling anyway. I also got to ride one of the 2 rapid bus lines in the area, and both of them are technically not in the Salt Lake City metro area, but rather in the other 2 metro areas that make up the Wasatch Front. I'll focus on the one I got to ride, which is the Utah Valley Express, running from the Orem Frontrunner station to the southern endpoint of the Frontrunner, Provo, via 2 universities, Utah Valley and Brigham Young. It's just shy of 10 miles long and has center-running dedicated bus lanes for about half of the route, with all the other easier-to-implement BRT features you'd expect, like level boarding, prepayment, enhanced stations and vehicles, all that. Overall, a lot better than most US cities' feeble attempts at bus rapid transit, and hey, at least they went for it. Looking at you, Chicago. Salt Lake has a pretty extensive frequent bus network too, especially in the core city. Now let's shift gears a bit. I'm a regional rail guy at heart, and Salt Lake City did not disappoint here. The Wasatch Front's regional rail line, the Frontrunner, was honestly my favorite part of Salt Lake City. The views from the train alone are basically enough to make it a scenic ride in my opinion, and totally worth it if you want to see some mountains from a comfy seat. It's genuinely a really good service too, connecting the core metropolitan area cities of Provo, Salt Lake, and Ogden. Its 16-station, 81-mile route got 4.13 million riders in 2024, almost 15,000 per weekday. And just for reference, that would make it the fourth most used commuter line in Chicagoland, above 9 other lines, including the formidable Metro Electric District and the South Shore line, which runs a comparable 90-mile long service, which is a good bit longer than all the other Metro lines. The Frontrunner has all-day frequencies of every hour, with a few additional rush hour trains to get you frequencies of every 30 minutes. Its secret sauce, I think at least, is that it's not trying to just cater to people coming into downtown Salt Lake in the morning and out in the evening. It has pretty good service in all directions throughout the day, and it runs through the city, something most commuter railroads in the US really struggle to do. One train every hour isn't great, I know, and at the end of this video we'll briefly touch on how they're working on that. It also doesn't run at all on Sunday, which is, I think, by far the line's biggest drawback and something that would take my proverbial review down by a whole star. It runs with MP Express commuter locomotives and Bombardier multi-level coaches that manage level boarding at all stations, a really nice feature that's usually lacking in diesel commuter lines like this. Another thing you don't normally see in lines like this, it doesn't share tracks with freight trains. UTA actually built new tracks next to the Union Pacific main line for its operations. It's mostly single-tracked with a second passing track at some stations and at a few key other spots, so that does pose a key limitation on how often they can run trains, but there's something that can help with that, and we'll get to it. So what attracts you to Salt Lake City? Yeah, what makes it special?
Salt Lake City has just so much potential to it. A lot of urbanists dismiss this place because, oh, the blocks are too big, the streets are too wide. It just doesn't follow the fundamental principles that good urbanism espouses. And because of our geography, more people are interested in making public transit actually work. It's not just there as a public service, but it's seen as a real alternative to a lot of potentially damaging developments in the future. But I think that there's a different way to do urbanism here that is unique and requires a bit more thought, but the opportunity's there. I definitely felt that while I was in town. I kind of jokingly told Christian that Salt Lake feels a lot like what a lot of mid-sized US cities could be, or should be, at least in the central part of town. There's definitely something unique about the city and how and why it's been able to build the transit it has. The answer, if there even is one, lies in history, geography, and politics. Salt Lake is actually one of the more densely populated urban agglomerations in the US. It's sandwiched between mountain ranges, meaning it couldn't really sprawl that far to the east and west. The geographic shape of cities actually does influence how effective rail transit can be. Like, that the Line city that Saudi Arabia wants to build? I think we all understand the main concept behind that. If everybody lives in one line, you can kind of concentrate your resources on that one area and make that one line really good. It's why cities like Honolulu have high transit ridership. They're sandwiched between the mountains and the coast in a long, narrow line, and Salt Lake City is pretty similar. They've been able to set up a really successful regional rail line that can serve almost all of the major population centers because they're all in one straight line. Albuquerque, New Mexico has a strikingly similar regional rail service that's still unique and cool in its own right, but it can't serve as much of the region as Utah's Frontrunner can, because Albuquerque is a city that had less geographic limitations hemming it in on two sides, so it's sprawled further outward. Notice how so much of the built-up area of Salt Lake is captured within just 3 miles of the Frontrunner alignment compared to Albuquerque. The valley that hems in Salt Lake is also a part of this. It frequently traps air pollution due to a temperature inversion during the colder months, making Salt Lake's air quality, at times, some of the worst in the world. Electric rail transit just makes sense in this sort of environment, and reducing pollution by lowering the amount people drive will have an outsized benefit on quality of life, and thus it's a politically smart move.
Salt Lake decided it wanted to be a transit city at least a decade before it was more in vogue to do so. The creation of a unified, strong regional body to integrate and control transit service and planning helped create the political wherewithal to start building out a robust transit system. There was also the promise of the 2002 Olympics that helped unlock federal funds for transit in the 90s. Salt Lake was able to get its first tracks line built by 1999, much earlier than most cities of any size thought to do so. This is maybe even more impressive given that around that time, the modern day UTA service area boundaries had about 800,000 less residents than it did in 2020. With transit bones this solid, Salt Lake already has a head start over lots of other cities that might want to play catch up and develop a well used transit system of their own with some good rail lines as the backbone. Because they managed to get the core of it built earlier, they'll continue to have the leg up because the value for your money for building transit just isn't what it was even 15 years ago, as they're seeing in Austin. All of this seems to have developed a local culture of riding transit in the Wasatch Front. It definitely seems like a place where your uncle, let's say, wouldn't look at you like you're crazy if you told him you rode the train to the airport. So we've talked about a lot of the good things. Now let's talk about one of the bad things. And it's right at the heart of the network, the central station. A transit network is only as good as its central station. There's a lot of truth to that. A central station is the one place where, in theory, the most people who use transit in your city will experience it on a daily basis. Salt Lake Central Station should theoretically be that for downtown Salt Lake City. It's the closest regional rail station to the downtown core, and it's a smooth transfer between the Frontrunner and the Blue Line.
It's really good at being a transfer station. You've got the light rail here and the commuter rail there and the buses over there. But in every other way, it's not much of a station, is it? It doesn't have a great station building. It's not central. It's not close to the central city. It's 6 blocks away from the downtown area. Like, you think this should be the area where there should be the most pedestrians in the state because it is the central station for the capital city. But it isn't. People don't come here unless they have to transfer from one thing to the other. It's not a third place like a great central station should be.
People don't come here unless they have to. That's usually not what you want to be said for your central station, and Christian's right. The big problem here is that the station is located smack dab in the middle of a sort of post-industrial no man's land. The huge, oversized Union Pacific and Frontrunner Rail corridor, which itself isn't far from the interstate, creates a barrier that the local downtown streets either have to contend with at grade, which slows down movement and is something that can potentially hit people, or the streets have to go over the rail corridor on tall bridges, which means the roads have to slope out into the blocks between 5th and 6th West, which makes those blocks pretty unappealing to, well, anything, especially apartments with ground floor retail space. What you're left with is a kind of dead zone in front of your central station, which is a huge wasted opportunity. Transit access creates a feedback loop that makes it an accessible and attractive place for people to live and work. Central stations, when done right, can be value-creating machines for cities that create a sense of place while generating tons of taxable apartments and businesses, because people will pay a premium to live in a convenient spot. Salt Lake Central's problem is also one of capacity and perception.
I'm going to try to keep my thoughts succinct here. Obviously, this is a temporary building. It's a trailer building, and it's here next to the freeway, underneath the bridge, and next to the train yards. It's only open late at night or very, very early in the morning. It doesn't do a lot to make you feel welcome here. It doesn't do a lot to impress you. Clearly, it's not trying to serve you. It's just here to be the minimum viable service for what Amtrak needs.
Amtrak's only train that stops here, the California Zephyr, is really built around the experience of seeing the brilliance of the Rockies during the daylight, and it either starts or ends with a long stop at Denver's beautifully redone Union Station. As far as the train serves Salt Lake City, it's more of an afterthought than a good service. The westbound train to the Bay Area comes just before midnight, and the eastbound train to Chicago comes at 3:40 a.m. I understand that the schedule shakes out this way to make it so you see the Colorado Rockies in the daylight, but it says something else too. It says that Salt Lake City, with its fully exposed temporary station, isn't worth making a trip to by train, which of course couldn't be further from the truth. Having an undignified central train station where the experience level is kind of capped by the lack of facilities means less people will choose to take the train at all, whether it's Amtrak or Frontrunner.
Whereas the Rio Grande Depot, something that was built to be accommodating, to be welcoming.
The Rio Grande Depot, that building from the beginning of the video. I think we need to hear more about that.
The Rio Grande Plan has three major parts to it. The first part is to build a new grade-separated corridor for all trains going through Salt Lake City. This is the commuter trains, freight trains, Amtrak, everything. That would mean that there'd be no more railroad crossings that divide the east and the west side from each other. And that new corridor would go here along 500 West, which happens to go next to this old train station, which is the Rio Grande Depot. So the second part is restoring rail service to our historic train station. We currently don't have a train station. We have a train stop where it stops by the platform, but it's not a station, a third place part of the city where people want to gather and be connected by public transit. And then the last part is redeveloping the rail yards, which is all the space where the trains are now, that 70 acres of land where the tracks spread out next to the freeway. We would take all that land and redevelopment into a new urban neighborhood. By developing that neighborhood, we would have enough private investment to repay the cost of the project. The project cost is estimated to be about $3 to $5 billion, which is a pretty big project for Utah. But the return on investment is expected to be about $12 billion. So it pays for itself 2 or 3 times over by building the Rio Grande Plan.
As an outsider at least, it seems hard to imagine a single project that would do more to make Salt Lake City a better place than this one. For $3 to $5 billion, you get a beautiful new centerpiece to your city, faster trains, new prime real estate unlocked, safer streets that don't deal with huge, unsafe railroad crossings, and all the positive feedback loop that comes with all that. If the track system was spurred on by the 2002 Olympics, I honestly can't think of a better way to make the city more welcoming to the world than by implementing the Rio Grande Plan before the 2034 Olympics. The plan is envisioned in phases, which smartly breaks up the cost and puts the customer-facing projects first, which would spur on higher transit ridership and allow for the land redevelopment potential to kick in, generating tax revenue to fund later phases. So phase 1 is the big one, the construction of the train box below 500 West with 2 or 3 freight tracks, 2 UTA tracks, and 2 tracks for Amtrak trains. This phase also would be where the Rio Grande Depot is restored and connected to the platforms. This should be able to be finished before the 2034 Olympics, and would cost between $1 and at most $2 billion, according to Christian. This phase wouldn't accomplish perhaps the biggest goal of the plan though, which is eliminating the need for the Union Pacific tracks through western downtown. That's because the train box would not have a junction to Union Pacific's tracks heading further west, and that's a major cost-saving measure, and the current tracks are UP's main connection to points north and south from Roper Yard, a major center of their operations. So they'd still need these tracks, until Phase 2 comes in and builds a connection to the west to bypass downtown, built with the necessary speed and efficiency for mainline ops. At that point, UP would have the train box to run trains through downtown, but their more complex interchanges are relocated out of the most valuable part of Salt Lake, the part that should be dedicated to people and businesses. Salt Lake would be free to develop the old rail yards into a new neighborhood centered around the state's gorgeous passenger rail hub, generating tax revenue to repay the project cost and fund the last phase, which is removing more grade crossings further north and rebuilding North Temple Station to better connect it to its surroundings. There's even an ongoing study right now called the West-East Connection Study, which is focused on addressing the barrier created by I-15 and the railroad tracks that cuts off the west side from downtown Salt Lake. The study is supposed to wrap up in the next year, and it'll help give a lot more information on the feasibility of the Rio Grande Plan.
The Rio Grande Plan makes me excited because it's a real solution to a problem. It's not addressing a railroad crossing with more signs or more safety features. It's solving the problem through better infrastructure. The fact that it includes so many different agencies is one of the struggles that we've been fighting uphill against, is that each different independent state agency has their own mandates, their own little box to build in. And without coordination between these, they don't see the bigger picture of what the Rio Grande Plan can be and what it can do for their own goals and what it can do for the city.
This coordinated hub for transit really is at the heart of so many goals for the future of Salt Lake City, and it fits perfectly into the transit ambitions of the entire state of Utah. Another local advocacy organization, the Utah Rail Passengers Association, has done a lot of work to identify where passenger trains should run in the state and fight for those routes. And the Rio Grande Depot would be at the center of it all. Building on the 2015 Utah State Rail Plan, which called for the revival of Amtrak's Pioneer between Salt Lake and Seattle and the Desert Wind from Chicago to LA via Utah and Las Vegas, an independent study by Mike Christensen takes things even further by seeking to establish several state-supported Amtrak routes to connect the capital city to Cedar City, Moab, Grand Junction, and Logan. Unfortunately, St. George, at the state's far southwest end, a lot closer to Las Vegas than Salt Lake, is the second largest metro area in the state with about 200,000 residents, and it isn't connected to the existing national rail network at all. So you'd need a connecting bus from Cedar City to St. George, at least until some point well into the future when new tracks could be built. A lot of Utah outside the Wasatch Front is really sparsely populated, and I was surprised to read in the Rail Passengers Association study that the population of all the intermediate stops is even a lot less than the towns served by the Illinois Zephyr train, which itself is an incredibly rural train. Even so, you do have a lot of incredible national parks near these railroads, and I'm sure plenty of tourists would choose to take the train to a place like Moab if they could. The study assumes 3 daily round trips to all these cities, but it doesn't go as far as identifying what the service pattern would look like, or if you'd have any trains running through Salt Lake City, like from Cedar City to Logan, for example. Locally in the Wasatch Front, UTA has plans to increase frontrunner frequencies to every 15 minutes at peak times, which, as many people have pointed out, would hopefully come with modernizing their rolling stock, probably with something built by Stadler right there in Utah. With the Rio Grande Plan in place, all these future initiatives will be more successful. A better central station means customers on intercity and regional trains will just have a more dignified experience. And when you already have to pay to take the train on Amtrak, you come to expect a dignified experience. An efficient, beautiful central station will help welcome people from around the world to Salt Lake City for the 2034 Olympic Games, showing all of them that Salt Lake City is a world-class, first-rate US city.
I see a lot of progress happening. We're getting more people joining in with our volunteer group and making real results happen. The main way to get involved is go to our website. Look at our link tree. We've got many different social media platforms. Our main way we talk to each other is on the Discord, which is again available on the link tree. Email us directly through the website. We'll find a place for you. So there's so many ways you can get involved in transit, whether you live here or not. And we think that the results will speak for themselves when we're done. You know, Salt Lake City is a place where people gather for conventions, for conferences, for Olympics and other sporting events. This is a place that's open not just to residents, but for everyone. The world is open to Salt Lake City.